let me all greet you and express my gratitude that so many experts are on this call, because I think that, a few thinking people in various parts of the world are getting really extremely concerned about the fact that we are closer to nuclear war than at any time in history before. And given the breathtaking irrationality of many Western leaders, it is requiring an extraordinary effort, I think, of the International Peace Coalition and other peace movements, which we have to unite to really get a change in the situation. First of all, we have the NATO maneuver ongoing, Steadfast Defender. This is 90,000 troops, NATO troops deployed already now since February into May, exercising for the first time the idea that there is an attack by Russia on a NATO country, and large numbers of troops are being moved in this maneuver. There is a Russian publication which comments on that, saying that such maneuvers give a very good cover and a pretext for an actual attack. So in that sense, we are in a heightened alert situation for that reason. And the same goes naturally for the overall strategic situation, where the idea to have an international security and development architecture on the international agenda, which would take into account the interest of every single country on the planet, that is also coming more and more in the discussion, because as we will hear in a few minutes, a congressman from Mexico has made a very important speech with exactly that demand. So I will stop here at this point, but I can only say that we are in a situation where we could lose civilization any moment. It is that tense, and I think the discrepancy between what we know is going on and what the awareness of the population is, it couldn't be a greater gulf. And that is what we have to urgently remedy and get people mobilized to change the policy into a new paradigm for a shared community of the one future of humanity, because that's what we have. We are one humanity sitting in one boat, and if this goes wrong, there's nobody going to be left to discuss why. So that is why we have to increase our efforts tremendously. Thank you.
The writing is on the wall. Ukraine is a slaughterhouse. They're losing the war. And the time is now that NATO, if they want to do something, they're going to have to step in and do it themselves. Keep in mind that there are a tremendous number of people in all NATO countries whose lives, whose reputation, whose family wealth depends on war-connected activities. And they do not intend to let Ukraine go down. So it's an extremely dangerous time. We need to do whatever we can to resist the possibility of American and NATO troops becoming directly involved in the Ukraine war to a greater extent than they already have. Thank you.
So what I think is this war has to end, because it's leading nowhere. From the very first day, it was leading nowhere. Now, the question is really, why are they keep on doing it? And for me, I would say it's a face-saving exercise now. They want to get out, but they don't know how. So, and the poor Ukrainians, I think nobody is asking them, because officially we have their president, and who is always very belligerent, but how do the Ukrainians feel? So I think they are exhausted and they are bled out. And I think just from this point of view, whoever is going to win on its political aim, whoever is going to win, the Ukrainians are going to lose this. So I think this is the issue, that we get somehow talks in Turkey or wherever where we can find an area where both sides, the West and Russia, we come to an area where we have common interests. I think that's diplomacy. Look for an area where we have common interests and then focus on that one and stop the shooting. That's the only way to get out of that.
As long as the United States simply cannot face the reality that it is no longer able to call the shots in the world, then we are still faced with a very dangerous situation. It's almost like a tired boxer who insists on climbing back into the ring and showing that he can still fight and still can be number one. It's harsh to say that, but I fear it is the reality at this point. Perhaps the truth in the United States is slowly sinking in with the rise of China and the rise of the BRICS powers and the global South. Maybe it's gradually sinking in, but it cannot happen too soon, because otherwise we are in a very dangerous game of chicken in Ukraine, with the United States determined to prove that its side will win. And I hope if some kind of voice of rationality can emerge at the end of and bring this war to a close, this could hopefully influence other very ugly and tragic situations like the one in Palestine and Gaza today. Thank you.
First point, I do agree that we are now in the foothills of the Third World War. It's not in a nuclear age, this sort of war is not going to be immediately declared, but so far we actually haven't hit the first ladder on the escalation precipice or escalator, but we are very close to doing so. There are plenty of people in Moscow who are suggesting that perhaps some sort of a salutary warning, perhaps a small nuclear strike on a European town, has been mentioned. So once the taboo on even talking on a limited nuclear war is out there, and the way that this is being dismissed by Western commentators shows just how dangerous this moment is. And this is precisely which I know that the LaRouche organization and all of us are emphasizing: peace and development. In other words, a framework for Commonwealth. We see it in all of the statements of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the enlarged BRICS Plus organization, and indeed the Russo-Chinese alignment, which is so important, and indeed with India and so many other states. So the global South, the political East, simply refuses, and hopefully can act as a moderating voice and hold us back, escalating and climbing up further from the foothills to the peaks of the Third World War. That's a little note of optimism, but I think in these dark times, we have to cling to the idea that the rest of the world simply isn't playing this game.
And there's a false narrative that you can use a tactical nuclear weapon to stop the Russians. You can make them back down. Well, Russia has nuclear weapons just as the United States does. And, once we introduce nuclear weapons into a war, if you're fighting another nuclear power, you can't, do you want to bet that they won't use them against you? I think that's another false narrative. The Russians made fun of the idea of winning a limited nuclear war back in the 1980s. So I think that the danger of nuclear wars is greatly exacerbated by these narratives that we can make Russia back down, that we have nuclear primacy over Russia. And if we have leaders that are delusional and accept these narratives, then it's a very strong likelihood that we can wind up being victim to them.
All of the previous speakers have spoken about the danger of a nuclear war as a result of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. I just want to mention that the Pacific is also a spark, a sensitive point, because the United States is sending the signal to Philippines, to Taiwan, in trying to encourage them to start a proxy war. We in the United States, we have learned since we withdrew from Afghanistan, it's much better to get others to do the actual fighting for us. And we just provide the wherewithal, the arms and the military weapons. But I want to point out to the American public that if a United States has successfully provoked a firefight between China and the Philippines, or between China and Taiwan, the PRC government fully recognizes who's actually behind such conflict. And I predict and I feel the first thing that will happen if such conflict were to start, the first thing they would do would be to take out all the U.S. naval vessels in the Pacific, so that whether it's the Taiwan people or the Filipino people can see that China is fully capable of destroying the backing, the military backing, and that will cause them to think twice.
The next year, President Kennedy, actually less than a year later, in his speech at American University on June 10th, warned, look, the thing we have to remember is not to give another nuclear power a choice between humiliating defeat and using nuclear weapons. Now, why do I mention that? Well, there is going to be a humiliating defeat in Ukraine. The Russians are not going to have to even consider using nuclear weapons. But the acolytes and the sophomores that are advising Biden might just say to the president, look, you know, we only have several months before the election. We're going to lose. It's going to be a humiliating defeat in Ukraine, particularly if we don't get that 80 billion more from Speaker Mike Johnson. So let's, we got these other weapons. Why don't we try these mini nukes? Which that will show them, and that will show the Russians, and that would last us maybe right till the election. Now, am I imagining something? No, these people have done the unimaginable time after time after time.
Hoy se ciñe nuevamente la amenaza de una guerra nuclear con Estados Unidos enviando armas a Ucrania y a Israel, donde lo que está sucediendo es claramente un genocidio atroz. Además, entrometiéndose en el conflicto entre China y Taiwán, con Rusia renunciando a los tratados de reducción de armas estratégicas y la prohibición de ensayos nucleares. Compañeras, compañeros, hemos llegado al borde del precipicio de una guerra nuclear y es imperativo que desde todas las naciones alcemos la voz, no la voz de una nación, ni de varias naciones, sino de la humanidad entera por la paz y en contra de la guerra nuclear. Que todos los ciudadanos del mundo también se unan en pos de una nueva arquitectura internacional de seguridad y de desarrollo que garantice el derecho al bienestar y al desarrollo económico de las personas del planeta. Lograr la paz a través del desarrollo, esa es la ruta. Es cuanto, diputada presidenta.